I don't know why that is exactly, but every time a year comes to a close, there's always this desire to somehow summarize it, to look back and reflect on it. I've only realized it not too long ago, last year actually. I wanted to make a video on the things I've played in 2017, but that didn't work out. A shame really, there was so much awesome stuff to talk about that year, and this one was alright. I haven't played a single game that actually came out last year. I currently don't have any hardware that plays modern games, even my PC doesn't want to do it anymore, just crashes all the time, but I've had my fair share of fun with games in 2018 nonetheless, so I compiled all of them into a handy little list. Said list is 10 entries long and consists of two types of games, ones that I've played for the first time last year and ones that I've rediscovered after a long period of time. See, in 2018 I've acquired two very important things, the Wii controllers to play Wii games on my Wii U and also an Xbox 360. That allowed me to play a lot of games I've not touched in about 4 or 5 years, so despite me technically replaying them, they felt like almost new experiences, hence they're eligible for this video. So, with that being said, let's see what really stood out to me in what I've played in 2018. I never really understood how I felt about Lords of Shadow when I first played it. It took the second game in the rebooted series, Mirror of Fate, for me to realize that it was a journey. Not a perfect one by any means, very flawed in fact, but still grand. By far my favorite thing about this game is its impeccable atmosphere of loneliness. You travel around a sad, somber world that's been almost completely sucked out of life, and it's gorgeous in its dying beauty. As Gabriel, you set out on an impossible one-man versus the entire world quest that takes you to the darkest corners of the planet, testing you physically and mentally, and when it's over, you're presented with one of the best cliffhangers in video games I've ever seen. Having replayed it last year on my recently acquired Xbox 360, half a decade after my initial playthrough, I've definitely grown to appreciate it way more than before, even despite its absolutely horrendous frame rate. It's still my least favorite game in the rebooted series, but it's a hugely important part of it, and I'm happy I have it. A special shout out goes to its battle system. Its combat is centered around the unique idea of managing your magic. You can use it to power yourself up and deal more damage, or convert outgoing damage into healing spells and restore your health. I've never seen an action game do anything of this kind, and I think it's absolutely awesome. It turns what would otherwise be a fairly standard hack and slash affair into an intense back and forth kind of gameplay that is just as challenging as it is satisfying. It's very easy to recommend Lords of Shadow. It's a good mix of exploration, puzzles, great atmosphere, and hack and slash combat, and while it's not the most accomplished game you'll ever play, its good vastly outweighs the bad. It's recently become backward compatible with Xbox One, so if you can't tolerate poor performance, that and the PC version are the best ways to experience it. My first proper exposure to the Legend of Zelda series was Breath of the Wild. Yes, somehow, despite having stuck with Nintendo consoles for as long as I have, it was only in 2017 that I finally gave this franchise a go. I loved Breath of the Wild, so last year I decided to explore this legendary series further. Skyward Sword always looked very interesting to me. Cozy, somewhat, so I bought it on eShop in September and, well, enjoyed it a lot. It has a bright and colorful world, whimsical soundtrack, lots of fun side activities and rewarding exploration, and oddly enough an interesting narrative. From what I can see, it definitely tries to be more engaging on the story front than past Zeldas, paying more attention to its characters and the relationships therein, and it's all just neat. As far as gameplay goes, it seems to be your classic Zelda stuff. Power-ups, dungeons, controller gimmicks, all very competently put together the way only Nintendo can. Skyward Sword is a very quality game. Perhaps even the most quality among everything else on this list. The reason it's not high is because I haven't actually finished it. I've put over 20 hours into it and then got distracted by something. I will get back to it eventually, for it was a very enjoyable first 20 hours. Also, Link is very cute in this one. Anarchy Reigns is a tricky one. It's a simple and very straightforward beat-em-up, quite unlike what you might expect from the people who made the most mechanically complex titles in this genre, but I had a lot of fun with it. First, I'd like to note that I really love the idea of its playground-like structure. It's not a linear game where you walk from point A to point B, and it's not an open-world game either. Instead, you have a large open space that you are free to run around in, fighting anyone who gets in the way and taking on missions. The more points you get, the quicker you unlock new missions, and that's how you make progress in the story. I think it's a very unique way of going about a game like this. More games should try something like that. The battle system is fairly simplistic, as previously mentioned, but it's also quite demanding. You need to commit to your actions and observe your enemy's behavior very closely. The platinum way of doing things is still here. The better you are at the combat, the more points you get, and therefore the easier it is for you to progress through the stage, and that's pretty cool. The story is interesting. The plot doesn't really go anywhere, but good lord, these cutscenes are amazing. This is where the budget went. Looking back, Anarchy Reigns is nowhere near as excellent as some of the other titles on this list, but I've had tons of fun with it. It's not without its quirks and problems, but I've enjoyed it a whole lot. Even despite its most daring choices.
Oh, damn! I'm way too black for all this shit.
Metal Gear Rising is basically typical Hideo Kojima nonsense, mixed with typical Platinum Games nonsense. It's so ridiculously absurd and over the top you can't not love it. You play as a ninja who can cut through planes, run on missiles, toss giant robots all over the place, and regenerate health by carving out the spines of his enemies and smashing them in his fist. And all of that is in the world of cyborg monkeys and nanomachines. And the game will happily explain all of this to you should you ever wonder. Complete nonsense. For someone like me who loves hack and slash, the combat is of course the main attraction here. It's not as deep as Bayonetta's, but still incredibly fun. Pulling off parries feels really good. The bosses are easily the biggest highlight of the game. If you've heard anything about Metal Gear Rising, it's probably that it has the hypest soundtrack in all of video games. And yeah, I can't disagree with that, the music is fantastic. What makes it so good is that it works in tandem with not only gameplay by making it more exhilarating as the fight goes on, but also with the story side of things too, by elaborating upon the personalities of the characters you fight. It's genius stuff and I can't recommend this game enough. It might be a bit short, but it's packed with so much action you won't be able to forget it. Give it a look. Disaster Day of Crisis was a game that made me buy my first console. Developed by Monolith Soft prior to them becoming famous for their Xenoblade games, it's probably one of the most unique experiences I've had with a video game. It's part third-person action-adventure game, part first-person rail shooter, with various rescue minigames and motion-controlled driving segments that takes place in a world caught up in a series of natural disasters happening one after another, and also has a cheesy B-movie plot with Ruben Langdon playing the main antagonist. Do I need to tell you more? This game is awesome! It was 2013 when I played it for the first time, and when I finally replayed it last year, I was blown away by its silliness and charm all over again. One thing that I think is really awesome about this game is that it lets you partake in its disaster events. You will get caught up in floods and hurricanes, you will try and rescue people from fiery tornadoes and volcano eruptions, and you will attempt to escape from a tsunami on foot because of course you will. This game is a prime example of a Wii exclusive. It's weird, it's unconventional, and most importantly, it's fun. Very arcade as well, with consumables being giant power-ups that float in the air. Such a shame it never made it to America and Canada. Apparently Reggie didn't like it. Oh well. If you can get your hands on it, please play Disaster Death Crisis. It's great fun. Apparently I can't make a video without talking about Fatal Frame in some capacity. The Wii edition of Fatal Frame 2 is not only my favorite game in the franchise, but also my favorite horror game. It has a great atmosphere of being lost in a hostile environment, it's very good at building tension, it has some of the best jump scares I've seen in a horror game, and it also has a fun battle system. Despite the fact I keep rambling on and on about this series, I don't think I've ever talked about the brilliant premise behind its combat for some reason. In order to fight enemies in these games, you have to look directly at them through the viewfinder of your camera, in first person of course. You have to look these crippled, broken, tortured spirits right in their dead eyes as they slowly approach you, and the reason you have to do that is because the best way to deal damage to a ghost is to catch it mid-attack right before it grabs you, getting that titular Fatal Frame. It's a genius approach to combat in a horror game. Among other games in this series, Fatal Frame 2 is generally considered to be the best one, and I would have to agree with that. It is by far the most well written, its narrative is easy to follow, and it has a lot of memorable moments. Opinions of course vary, but I'd argue that compared to the rest of the franchise, this game is definitely the least flawed one in it. Everything in it is just given enough time and care, making it feel very polished, and that's why I was so happy to finally get my hands on it again. I've played it 6 times from beginning to end. 3 of those were in 2018. That's how much I love it. The last story was, well, the last home console RPG from Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of the Final Fantasy series, and is a game that shocked me with just how consistent it is. It's a very quality experience from the moment you start it to the moment you see the end credits. Compared to its Operation Rainfall Big Brother, Xenoblade Chronicles, it doesn't exactly reach its highs, but definitely never falls to its lows either. It's a very well adjusted game, if you will. At no point in my playthrough did I think, oh, this part sucks. It was an enjoyable ride from beginning to end. It keeps things interesting by introducing new situations, both in the story and gameplay form, at every corner. It doesn't force you into grinding, which again after Xenoblade I can't be thankful enough for. It has a fairly standard fantasy plot, but the characters that keep you company throughout are fun to be around. I enjoyed their banter a lot. I was enamored with the haunted house side quest. It was great, you know I love me a spooky ghost mansion. And the entire game is just a very good time. It might not be the most ambitious Sakaguchi project, but it's definitely an easy recommendation from me. 35 hours of a quality action RPG doesn't come around very often these days.
I'll hold them up here. You search for another way out.
Oh good. Damn. A dead end.
Looks like this is it.
I get somewhat sentimental thinking about Fragile Dreams. It's a game that's so genuine, so heartfelt, and yet so not very good at being a video game. I love its premise, and a lot of its narrative, and even though it's not exactly the most enjoyable gaming experience I've ever had, I still think it deserves some time in the spotlight. It's a game about humanity, about us, people. Things it brings up about us, things it lets us witness, they make you think. I often lose myself in dozens of fictional worlds full of drama and sad endings, but I've never felt this touched by a game in such a real way. A game that looks like this, no less. This game is, in a word, touching. And I could tell that it's a third-person action-adventure kind of game with RPG elements and potentially horror-themed environments, but that doesn't really matter here. That won't make you understand what Fragile Dreams is. It's a special kind of experience, and one that stayed with me for a long time after I finished it. Whether you like it or not depends on what kind of person you are. And it's very possible that you won't enjoy it at all. Hell, I don't even know if I enjoyed playing through some of its parts. But it was definitely one of the biggest highlights of the year for me, and I want to give it its due. What can be better than Fatal Frame? Well, more Fatal Frame, obviously. Fatal Frame 3 The Tormented might not be my favorite game in the series, but since this was a new experience for me, it was definitely something I couldn't just avoid talking about. It's a unique and important entry in the franchise. It experimented with a new structure, creating this in and out of the nightmare gameplay loop where you can walk around your apartment and interact with different things, while your typical Fatal Frame business commences when you go to bed and dream of the manner of sleep. Its story devotes more attention to the feelings and struggles of its characters than previous games, with the main antagonist playing the role of a noble sacrifice in a world drowning in the pain and suffering of people. It's also the first time you're given control over 3 different characters, each with their own abilities and narratives. Interestingly, this game feels like a celebration of the series at times, with various callbacks to the previous entries, returning characters, locations, and of course, ghosts. And as you might know, if you're a fan of the franchise like me, a lot of these things were then adopted by later installments in the series, be it in gameplay, structure, or story form. I have a lot of issues with this game, and I still stand by what I said in my video on it about it being my least favorite Fatal Frame, but I recognize and appreciate a lot of the things it does, and I still like it despite all of that. It has very enjoyable combat, and that's a huge plus in my book. It's not easy to recommend though. It is advisable you experience the first 2 games before you dive into this one, and it might, and probably will, require a lot of patience and persistence. but I do believe there's a fair bit of enjoyment to be had in Fatal Frame 3. And before I reveal my number 1, I believe a round of applause is in order for several honorable mentions. I'd like to give a special shout out to Steam World Heist, a wonderful turn-based 2D strategy game by Image & Form. It's about space cowboys, who are also robots and they're also pirates, I think, and they're fighting against their evil government. Play it! Then we have Tomb Raider Legend, the title that brought me into video games. I bought it for my 360 and played through it again. It's a very good action-adventure game featuring the best incarnation of Lara Croft. And finally, I've also played Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light this year again. It's a great isometric puzzle platformer with arcade combat that is probably even better with a friend, although I don't have any so I wouldn't know. And that's that. I enjoyed all of these a whole lot and I welcome anyone to try them out for themselves. I've had plenty of great gaming experiences in 2018. There were games that stood out to me on an emotional level, that surprised me with their unique ideas and mechanics, and that I simply enjoyed playing through. But no game etched itself into my mind quite like Mad World. Mad World is a game that is wholesome to an almost unbelievable degree. Everything in it, presentation, story, gameplay, all works together to create an unforgettable experience that completely blew me away. I revel in the atmosphere, the tone, the cinematography of its cutscenes, and while that does contrast with gory brawling to rap music, which is equally as enjoyable, all these things just click with one another in the context of Mad World's plot, which revolves around shock entertainment. Kill your opponents in the most savage of ways with whatever you have at hand at the moment and hear the crowd cheer in ecstasy. This game is incredibly violent, but not just for the sake of being violent, that's backed up by its narrative, and it's probably one of my favorite examples of a game's story translating to gameplay in a smooth and appropriate way. The more sadistic and elaborate your acts of murder are, the more points you get, and the more points you get, the easier you progress through the stage. Underneath the black and white aesthetics, and tons of blood of course, Mad World shares its foundation with Anarchy Reigns. It's an open-ended arena fighter essentially, run around and earn points, unlock new activities, fight the boss. It's a simple and refreshing formula, and one that doesn't outstay its welcome. Every stage introduces a new setting, new enemies, new gimmicks and hazards, and it's a blast through and through.
And yes means anal.
And I just love all of it. I love the comic book art style, I love its banger of a soundtrack, I love its stupid commentators and complete gibberish they're talking, and I love breaking people's backs with my bare hands. For Platinum's first project, Mad World is one hell of a video game. It's funny, it's memorable, it's satisfying, and it's the best thing I've played in 2018. And there you have it. This year was pretty good for me as far as gaming went. Not as utterly bombastic as 2017, but still very good. I've not played a lot of games in 2018, but what was there I enjoyed a ton. I need to sort things out on my end actually. Out of all these games I've only made videos on 2, and that's not particularly great. I'll try and remedy this situation in 2019, and I'd like to hope the games I'll discover in the coming 12 months won't disappoint either. So, with that being said, thank you for watching and Happy New Year!